Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for this nice introduction and also for setting this up for us from Singapore. Myself, I am based out of Mumbai and currently been in lockdown for the last 4 weeks, enjoying the cooking, enjoying the cleaning of the dishes, and enjoying wiping the house. For today, we want to inform you a little bit on a couple of things we went through as a team and some thoughts we had on how we can manage talent acquisition function in the downturn. As a group and as a leadership team, we have been thinking how we can support our clients and also potential clients in terms of doing things beyond the transactional approach, beyond recruitment, especially in these times. And with a team of 160 people in the last week, we actually have been reaching out to you and try to understand how you are managing most of the things in talent acquisition today. And we, through the survey, we captured more than 500 answers, and we're going to try to take you through that a little bit and adding on our own specific views in that particular asset. From my perspective, as a little bit context setting, I'll try to give you a little bit what is happening today and how it specifically is getting a little bit, having impact on the talent acquisition function. And the first thing is that there's 3 things which currently are happening, and you would all be aware of them, so I'm not going to tell you anything new. But one is there's a global pandemic happening and it affects our daily lives. Yeah, and this is a bit similar if I take some parallel to what happened with the global financial crisis or even with the dot-com crisis, where in the dot-com crisis prior to that, the Twin Towers went down and we were all afraid of, or at least especially in the US, about terrorism. We had a similar scare with banks going down and the GFC. So an environment like that we've been through as human beings in the past as well. And this has led into a second piece, which resulted in the global financial crisis in 2008-9 and in the dot-com crisis in 2002. Now today we also having a slowdown of the economy, and these 2 things have happened before, like I said. And what we've seen in these particular instances, and I've experienced myself in the GFC, is that for talent acquisition, it's particularly challenging on both fronts. Yeah, we are often in between, on one end the hiring manager and on the other end the candidate in the market. And within a context like this, we often see that a candidate is even more scared or looks for job security and reluctant to move. So we actually are fishing in a much smaller pool than what we do in a better market. And on the other hand, we have hiring managers who particularly become very picky in terms of the type of talent they suddenly will bring on board. Plus the fact that on one day they're gonna hire and the other day they're probably putting things on hold again, and then they want to hire again. So it's a very volatile environment, and most of you, if you were there in 2008, 2009, you would have gone through this, and even if you were there before. Now, what is particularly challenging today is the fact that we also need to do this in a remote working style, sitting at home, using the digital tools available to us. And in varying degrees, you would have access to the proper tools to perform interviews, to onboard candidates into your system and to ensure that they actually integrate in the beginning. So these are a couple of things we will try to touch upon. So for today, we're going to try to address things which you would have seen in GFC and in previous downturns as well. How do you manage your brand in a moment like this? And how do you manage your budget? But the extra flavor which will be given by Mohit is around how do you do that in a digital way. And I'm going to pass now to Pranshu. Pranshu Upadhyay is a regional director in our Mumbai office, and he specifically is going to focus on employer branding. And he's going to show a little bit more in detail about how you personally can manage your brand in your company. Pranshu, over to you.
Thank you, Nico, for the introduction and setting the context right. Quick introduction about myself. I started with PageGroup in 2011 and have been a part of the business from the last 10 years. Currently manage multiple practices from our Mumbai office, including the HR business. So a couple of weeks back, I was watching this video by Arnie Sorensen, who is the global CEO of Marriott. And he talked about and compared the current pandemic or the situation to something that is unprecedented in the history of the organization. And mind you, Marriott is a 100-year-old company. So even the events like World War, Great Depression, 9/11 attacks, 2008 global financial crisis did not have such an impact on the business community as this particular event had. To say that the HR teams are right now taxed would be an understatement. We got speaking to a lot of HR leaders in the recent past, and this is a completely uncharted territory. I mean, at one end, you are expected to maintain and communicate business continuity, communicate policy changes, and also calm down the anxiety of individuals within the organization to an extent where you are not confident as to when you will be relieved completely out of it. So we looked at employer branding. The great opportunity that this particular global crisis also presents us is to connect with our colleagues. So we connected with a lot of colleagues in the region and globally as well to take on some of the best practices within talent acquisition that companies are adhering to. And I've tried to put some examples within my presentation and tried to make it more anecdotal in nature. So a survey that most of you would have taken are certain questions on perception. The first one was the most effective strategy in terms of managing a perception as an employer. And around 40% of the respondents agreed that engaging with the current employees on their progress with assurances of no job losses was something that proved quite effective, with 30% agreeing on regular engagement and communication with talent, even if a recruitment freeze is happening within the organization. What's encouraging though to see is that while doing this communication, which was difficult for a lot of leaders to do because you are communicating the impact of a situation which is completely out of control for an employee, was done really well across the board. So around 70% of organizations are very happy with the way their leaders communicated measures around cost cutting, measures around layoffs, and we also saw 30% of the organizations not doing anything about it. So they have not taken any measures. So there are two ends of spectrum here really. On one side, we see a lot of CEOs coming out in the open from Tata, from Bajaj Auto, talking about that there won't be any layoffs in the organizations. And as much as making a personal commitment to all the employees that, Rajiv Bajaj here saying, I'll cut my salary to zero before a single employee is laid off. However, as I gave a previous example of Marriott, the hospitality industry has been impacted really badly, along with the travel and the aviation industry. I mean, for Marriott, the revenues have dipped by 90%, and you can compare it with 2008 global financial crisis when they saw a 25% shortfall in their revenues compared to a 90% drop right now. So Rahul Chaudhary, again, an example from Indian context, and this resonated really well with a lot of talent acquisition heads out there. Well, this is the business leader coming out and talking about a voluntary resignation scheme that he introduced within the organization to reduce the fixed cost, and his message was really well received. I mean, all in all, it looks like an outplacement project that a lot of PA heads like you would be aware of, but a business leader coming out there and leveraging his personal LinkedIn network is something that really made a lot of positive impact on the current employees too. And I couldn't capture the messages here, but there were a lot of messages from talent acquisition heads talking about the opportunities within their own organization as well. michaelpage outplacement business in the last 5 to 6 weeks also saw a great surge in terms of employers ensuring that even if there are layoffs in the organization, they part ways on a very good and a very human and compassionate note. So really, there are two ends of spectrum in terms of organizations doing something about it, but the common thread is communication here in terms of being authentic, coming out right in the open, and you have to evaluate which organization you are a part of and whether such kind of communication strategies are being adopted on, because this is really impacting the employer brand. The other question was around hiring index, and this was encouraging, I think, for us, especially because we are into recruitment, is that 56% of the companies are hiring out there, 44% of them are not. 28% said that they are posting jobs publicly about the recruitment that they are doing, and the other half said that they are not posting on jobs. Now, if you look at global scenario, there are certain examples how companies have completely revamped about how they've started putting out the job postings. So I picked up this example of Dignity Health. This is one of the top healthcare provider in USA. The message that used to rest in the career section has come out on the landing page in the organization about, if you see right on the top here, that the organization is moving to a virtual recruitment process in response to the current situation. So the TA leaders, the popcorn teams are really getting out there in terms of communicating what's the current strategy within the organization. If you look around, apart from the business continuity and financial health of the organization, the most talked about thing is what's happening to jobs, whether organizations are hiring or not. And that's why you see organizations completely revamping their communication strategy. Another healthcare provider, and this one is from US as well, has developed a frequently answered question, the FAQ page, for all individuals who come to their website in terms of seeking out jobs or openings, that addresses not only the question whether they are hiring currently or not, but also takes care of whether what they're doing in terms of keeping their employees or caregivers safe. Some organizations have taken a step forward, and this one, Seniors Health, it's a Europe-based MNC listed. It's a contract research organization, which has actually started putting out a lot of posts and articles in terms of tips on how to do video interviews, how to ace virtual interviews, etc. So really, we see a shift in the content. Again, Indian example, the first ones, as we all know, in terms of being asked or whose job come under scanner are the interns and the campus hires. So clients recently onboarded some interns in a virtual day. And I think the messaging across it really created a lot of positive impact on the channels that they used. So this is an Indian example in terms of onboarding. Now, all the examples that I gave up until now were organizations that are either continuing to hire or are currently onboarding. However, if you are a TA head of an organization, you may think that if the recruitment is frozen or the jobs have gone on hold, staying silent about it may be the right strategy. But that's not what the organizations are doing. Even if there is a recruitment freeze, there is a communication which is as clear as to when there is not. So this is one thing and one time where you need to be quite authentic. You need to be agile. You need to come across as an organization which has taken a stand, a decisive stand, and not create a chaos or panic in the market with the uncertainty around things. So Mitsubishi, in every job description that they have posted out, mentioned that because this position requires an on-site presence, the job that actually requires on-site presence, and they will be completely holding on to recruiting these positions till the current situation resolves. Another UK MNC, ClearScore, talked about that while the TA teams will get extremely busy when we rejoin office and come back to normalcy, however, in current times, you send us your profile, however, we are pausing on the hiring front. So you see on all these spectrums, in both examples that I used, employees being communicated about layoffs, employees being communicated about no salary cuts, and recruitment on hold and recruitment continuing. There is active communication happening, and all these brands, and there is proven SEO data to back it up, have been able to relate to the candidate and the talent pool a lot better. Another challenge that we have seen in these times is that though the criteria from a talent pool to choosing an organization does not change in a revolutionary way, we have seen in the last 7 to 8 weeks, the uncertainty in the environment is accounting to be one of the biggest reasons why there are offer declines in the process. So the conversion ratios are dropping because the candidates are getting cold feet in terms of joining an organization which they don't know too much about. And job security right now has taken the number one place over and above the wage increase and the salaries that are on offer as well. I picked up this example of Atticus Legal, which is a startup in UK. They saw a very high drop rate of candidates accepting the offer but not ready to move. And what they started doing, the one on the right that you see, is a software engineer ad, and in every advertisement that they put out a note on COVID-19 and decided to take the situation head on. They addressed the applicant directly, that we understand that working for a startup at this particular point of time may not be something that you would want to take a chance on, but here is a list of reasons why you should work with us. You will never see such kind of postings and change in terms of branding and communication from the talent acquisition teams in terms of revamping the job descriptions, etc. But these are the real brands that are able to establish that. We then asked the biggest concern for internal employees right now, and no surprises there. The business continuity and the financial health of the organization was agreed and given a 33% weightage by 1/3 of the respondents, along with mental health and well-being. Here we have seen that a lot of business leaders, right up to CEO level, and I'm talking mostly for organizations which are not listed and whose financial data is not out, talking to employees across levels and explaining the financial health of the organization so that all the measures that they are taking are well understood and perceived in the right way. So these were 3-4 questions which we covered from an employer branding perspective. I have few takeaways, which when I looked at the data and a lot of open-ended questions as well that I wanted to talk about. People talked about if we are a part of manufacturing companies, how do we do things a little bit differently? You hear in the news, in the media across, that some of the automotive manufacturers have converted their assembly lines to manufacture ventilators. You hear about Louis Vuitton, instead of manufacturing perfumes, now they are manufacturing sanitizers, a similar story by a lot of alcohol companies. And as a TA head, you may be like, okay, my company cannot really relate to this kind of manufacturing, and what do I do? So an interesting observation came from the survey that we did. A lot of manufacturing companies which have the big facilities in tier 3 locations where let's say the cement companies, etc., they have joined hands in terms of providing their blue collared and white collared base that's resting in tier 2 and tier 3 cities in terms of delivering essential items. So this cuts across locations like Hosur, Sri City, Jagadia, Nimrana in Rajasthan, and that's something that they're doing and associating themselves with the crisis management team. Innovative and meaningful communication is the key in terms of establishing a very, very strong employer brand. And that's something that I covered in terms of the job ads being revamped completely. Building pipeline is another thing that a lot of good talent acquisition heads have started doing. So there are positions that were under consideration before we entered into this situation. And rather than completely closing themselves out to the talent pool, they are still interviewing candidates virtually and keeping in touch. In michaelpage, we saw a jump of around 40% in terms of the candidate interactions in the same review period last quarter, which essentially indicates that candidates are ready to talk, candidates are available to talk. There are no constraints in terms of them attending a lot of meetings, and the availability is on a high. So good TA heads are also building and that connect in terms of being very ready once the situation resolves to come back in terms of building this pipeline. TA strategy. So this one is interesting. As someone said, when a fisherman don't go to sea, they repair their nets, and that's what a lot of good TA heads are doing right now in terms of looking at the TA strategy, looking at the job descriptions that wanted a complete revamp. They are looking at the career section in the website and using this time really, because a lot of time within a TA role, as you would agree, goes into daily firefighting in terms of arranging CVs, interaction, stakeholder management, and you really get time in terms of developing this strategy from a long-term basis. So these are 3-4 takeaways that came from my employer branding perspective from my side. Before I hand it over to my colleague, I just wanted to mention that 1 year back, we hosted a TA conference in Mumbai Sofitel, which I think 150-200 of you were a part of. And the topic of that event was the impact of technology on talent acquisition. Little did we know, a year later, we will be in a situation where the impact of technology will completely be transformed. And to cover a little bit more on that, to really give a digital spin as to what companies are doing in terms of virtual interview, etc., I will hand it over to Mohit. Thank you. Over to you, Mohit.
Thank you, Pranshu, for that insightful session. Hello, everyone. Quick introduction about me. My name is Mohit Bharti. I've been with michaelpage for over 8.5 years now. And based out of Gurgaon office, I'm responsible for managing multiple practices. Let me share my screen with all of you. Please confirm if my screen is visible. Sophia, Akshay.
Yes, go ahead, Mohit.
All right, let me begin by a quote from an ancient Greek philosopher who said, "Nothing is permanent except change." I'm sure most of us would have read or heard about this particular statement. However, it's only in times like this that we understand the true meaning of this statement. Change is always happening around us. Most of the time, change is gradual, which gives us enough time to adapt. Having said that, there are always events which trigger and expedite the change. And when such events happen, they don't give us enough time to change. So rather, we are forced to adapt or forced to change in such environment. And in the current environment of COVID-19, we can say that it's one of such events which is happening, which is forcing the businesses around the world to change. And that brings to my next question. Who led the digital transformation of your company? In fact, this was one of the WhatsApp forward which I received a few days back. It was funny at the outset when I read about it, but then it made me think, and it made me realize how COVID-19 is leading to the digital transformation of the organizations and of different functions. It's leading to the digital transformation of talent acquisition as a function and how recruitment as a function is conducted. It's leading to changes in how candidates are interviewed, how organizations select and onboard candidates. Just to share an insight over here, yesterday I was speaking with one of our clients, and during the conversation he asked me, Mohit, how many times would you have seen a candidate at a CXO level being hired without even a single face-to-face interview being conducted? That got me thinking. And as I said, I've been with Page for over 8.5 years in recruitment. And I could only think of one example, that too, which happened by chance, not by choice, wherein a person at a CXO level was hired without even a single face-to-face round. Leave aside the CXOs. Even if I talk about, say, seniors or mid-senior hiring, there were only a handful of examples which came to my mind wherein the candidates were hired without even a single face. Having said that, in last 4 weeks, I have seen more candidates who've been digitally interviewed and digitally selected than what I had seen in last 8.5 years. Now, this was one of those eureka moments for me, which made me believe that whether we accept it or not, change is bound to happen, and change is happening as far as talent acquisition as a function is concerned. Now, moving to the survey results, which most of you have filled up, starting with the first question, which is pretty straightforward, which says, have you started interviewing candidates digitally? It's not surprising to see that 76% of the organizations have said yes, that they have started interviewing candidates digitally. Having said that, there's still 24% organization. Now, for this 24% organization could be either in two brackets. Firstly, because of the current situation, they are not hiring at all, and hence there is no need for them to digitally interview candidates. Or secondly, as a company policy, they do not hire candidates unless they have a face-to-face interview which is being conducted. Now, if you are in the later category as an organization, there are a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. Firstly, what if this lockdown is extended? Yeah, in that situation, if there's a critical position that you have to hire. And even once we are back in office, there's a high possibility that the social distancing will stay for a while. And that's not only from the organization side, but might be also from the candidate side. Yeah. So over here, my advice would be that digital interviewing is here to stay. It's not by choice initially. Having said that, as more and more organizations are going to use digital interviewing, they're also going to realize that the advantages of digital interviewing, like having a faster turnaround time and reduced cost as well, where you won't have to fly down the candidates. And these days, with multiple VC platforms available and multiple chatbots available, digital interviewing will definitely pick up from. Now, from the 76% respondents of the organization which said that they have incorporated digital interviewing, 69% of the respondents have said that they are using digital interview for all interview stages. Now, this was a pleasantly surprising result for me. because the biggest apprehensions for most of the clients that we have been speaking to is how to reach to the offer stage unless we have met with the candidate even once. I know there is a very big inertia which most of the clients have, but it's good to see that organizations are getting prepared, or rather interviewing candidates across all stages through digital mediums. I like to quote an example over here of one of our clients that we have been working for last 8 years. They've always had the process that for the last round of discussion, there's always a panel case study round which has to happen where the entire leadership team is present, and it has to be a face-to-face round. Having said that, it was a very big inertia for them, but now they've agreed to move the panel case study round to also a digital interviewing round, which clearly shows to us that the change is happening and it'll be bound to happen. Some of the best practices that we have followed as far as digital interviewing is concerned. When it comes to digital interviewing, we should focus on what truly matters. Why? Because a lot of organizations as well as candidates are still getting used to the digital interviewing, and most of the times candidates or the clients are not used to picking up non-verbal cues. So it's very important that we focus on what truly matters, like what are the traits for the roles, whether there's a compatibility in the role or not for the candidate, what's about the fitment in the teams. All those particular things becomes extremely critical. And secondly, as Pranshu mentioned in his previous session, employer branding and the post-interview engagement and experience that you provide to a candidate will be absolutely critical. One of the other examples which I like to quote over here is where one of our clients, after every round of interview that they do digitally, and if they like the candidate, they share a video with the candidate which shows how a normal working environment looks in the office. So they have a video which was shot during a normal working day, which they are able to share it with the candidate so that the candidate has much more idea about what's the kind of environment that they'll get into once they join this particular organization. Moving to the next question, where we asked, how would you evaluate the effectiveness of a digital interview compared to a face-to-face interview? 6% of respondents said that they found digital interview more effective than a face-to-face interview. More insights on that. This is generally for organization where there is more of volume hiring. Ideally, TA heads wherein the KPIs are more related to faster turnaround time. They are figuring it out that during digital interviewing, they wouldn't have to wait for the candidates to fly down or to wait for the availability of the candidates. Hence, they're able to have a faster turnaround time. What's heartening to see is that 61% of the respondents have said it's as effective as a face-to-face interview. And however, 33% said that it's less effective than a face-to-face interview. So what we have tried to do is we've tried to pick up some insights from organizations which have said it's as effective so that we can share it with the other pool which say that it's less effective. So what we have seen is some of these organizations have started increasing the number of interactions. What's important is before you hire a person, before you get a candidate on board, you need to have that particular comfort. So earlier, if you were conducting 3 rounds of interactions, now the organizations are conducting 5 or 6 rounds of interactions, wherein a line manager or other stakeholders would meet with the candidate multiple times just to ensure that they get the comfort. Some of the other organizations have started involving cross-functional leaders as well so that they can get different perspective. The intent is to get the comfort before you reach the offer stage. Other thing that we have seen is the organization have increased their reliance on the leadership assessment as well as the psychometric tools. So what that also means is even the organizations which were previously relying on leadership assessment tools, so they've started using it a lot more across different levels, and the organizations which were not using it earlier have now started using it a lot more. And same goes for the reference checks and the background checks. I mean, we've had a client say who were earlier conducting 1 or 2 reference checks, now they would insist on having 3 to 4 reference checks to ensure that they get the kind of comfort. I mean, we all agree that face-to-face interview is something which is critical. However, given the nature of the environment, we have to ensure that we are able to provide an environment which is as closer to the face-to-face interview and to get the comfort before we go on to offer the candidate. The last question is about the digitally onboarding. The process is you digitally interview the candidates, then you select the candidate, and finally the candidate has to come on board. What is good to see is that 46% of the organizations have started onboarding candidates digitally. This is primarily for the organization where they have strong IT infrastructure in place. A lot of our clients have started shipping laptops to the candidates, and for the organization which have struggled to ship a laptop to the candidates, they have started providing them software support so that candidates can use the systems on the personal laptops as well as the personal systems, and they can start logging in. Having said that, this is something which is restricted to a certain specific functions as well as certain specific seniorities, and which is visible from the results as well, wherein 23% mentioned that's only for certain specific seniorities as well as functions. What we have seen is if it's a tech-related function or an analytics function or more of a support functions, organizations are much more open to have candidates on board digitally as well. Having said that, for certain functions wherein you require the person to be based either on site, as Pranshu mentioned in one of the examples, or sales role, wherein you would expect the person to go out in the field and conduct sales. For those particular functions, we have seen that the organizations are a little apprehensive of digitally onboarding the new joiners. There are also a pool of organizations which are not digitally onboarding. So multiple reasons around that. What we have come across, sometimes it's related to the security of the organization. Sometimes it's the fact that they do not have IT infrastructure. And for certain organizations, it's also a reason to identify whether they're in a position to get the new joiner on board. If not today, but the situation improves. And if I have to share some of the best practices over here, so we also conducted a parallel survey which was conducted with candidates. So some of the best practices are the ones which are picked up from that particular survey. Few of the things which came up, if you're digitally onboarding a new candidate, it's important that you communicate in abundance. Because of the given uncertainties, the candidates who come on board, they also tend to have anxiety, whether I'm contributing to the organization or I'm not contributing to the organization. So it's very important that you're able to provide comfort to the new joiners, and for which one of the things which is very critical is that you provide plenty of opportunities to the new joiner to connect with the line managers as well as different cross-functional leaders. Second thing which came out of that particular survey was that you need to create engagement with the candidates, and this particular engagement has not necessarily to be just on the business related stuff, but also has to be a lot more on the casual side, wherein you could mix both the business and the casual interactions together. Yeah. That's it from my side on the survey. If there are any questions from your side that you would want me to answer, please drop it in the Q&A session, which I'll try to pick it up. And before I pass it on to Nico, I like to urge everyone to please stay safe and take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohit. Thank you for these great insights. I was asked to speak a little bit about managing the budget within the talent acquisition role. And I think this is something which, of course, would be discussed, if not today, definitely in the future in a lot of boardrooms. And I want to just give a little bit insights. One, I'll share my screen on our survey, and also a little bit what I think personally you could do and how it could benefit you. Share. My screen is visible? Yep. So this is I've actually on one slide have put the data which we could capture from the survey we have conducted. A couple of small insights to pick up on. So if you look at the overall budget for recruitment, if there is going to be an impact, you can see it's quite surprising that still 23% of the companies are still looking at keeping the budget intact. And if you look at the type of industries, which is the table below, typically you'll see industries like FMCG, and then majorly on the foods side, financial services, real estate, pharma, and IT software. So these are a couple of ones which already would have been in a lot of people's mind for obvious reasons. If you look at the other end of the spectrum, we have 12% that sees really a big reduction, and this is typically in the industries we would have in mind. Manufacturing, of course, because of supply chains being hit severely, which chemicals is one of the part of. We also see in the FMCG space, but that will be more on non-food items, where we also see a huge impact again on the manufacturing side, travel and hospitality, and medical devices, because most of our clients in medical devices can't go to hospitals because everything is preserved for COVID patients. Clearly, what is reflecting here is that when an industry is doing well, budgets are intact. If they're not, of course, the impact is there. So that is quite obvious. On the other hand, we also just wanted to see a little bit of trend of what all of you are doing in terms of managing the budget. And we just want to see a little bit on the employee referral bonus, because that's an interesting one and quite generally used across different organizations. And I was keen to understand what different companies are doing. And it was good to see that most people actually keep their budget intact, but specifically that there is a part, 16%, that actually has or will change the budget. And again, there you see a quite divergence in approach, which is in the slide below on the right bottom corner, which clearly says, on one end, some companies will increase the bonus, and on the other hand, you actually have companies decreasing the bonus. So that will typically also be aligned on what is your focus. Is your focus cost cutting, or is your focus optimizing your recruitment strategy? And that's where I want to give a little bit of feedback on what I do think that needs to be done as a company. So if you look at budget, and this is just a little bit my reflection on it in terms of my years of experience in the industry, if you look at managing your budget, of course, I can quickly say what the cost measures are you take. You can look at your recruitment partners, you can get the rates down with them, you can look at the job boards. This is all very straightforward, and I'm probably not going to educate you on any things like that. But if you look on the other hand, what you need to look at today is what is your return on investment. Yeah, and typically, most talent acquisition people today are not really looking at that. What most people do, or most talent acquisition teams do, is they use two metrics. They use the time to hire metrics and the cost per hire metrics. And this will give you some insights on the overall healthiness of your talent acquisition function in the company, but it actually doesn't tell you whether you're optimizing the tools available to you and what each of the tools actually are costing. So that's why I'm vouching for the second piece, which is driving analytics to drive real insights and to see which tools really contribute and what every tool actually costs. And I give you a little bit insight on how we do it at michaelpage. I've changed the numbers a little bit because I don't want to give you all the details of what exactly is working, but it's just to give you a little bit the I would say context in which we are working. So what we do is, as a company, using a tool which is driven through Datarama, and it gives us actually a view on, from the moment a person comes in contact to us in any way digitally, till the person is actually recruited through one of our clients, where this person has traveled through from a journey perspective. And because of that, we can actually allocate a cost to every platform we actually using. So if you see, I've just put here digital channels on this point, but what we particularly doing is we have a particular cost in the media costs column here, which will be our actual cost, which we are paying on a yearly, monthly basis. You can choose that. And then from there on, we will get our applications. We will know how many applications we'll get. We know then the cost for that per application. We know from there on how many people actually we take forward to the next level in terms of putting them in processes with our clients. So we know what the cost is for each platform for the people getting through processes. And we also will see from every candidate which eventually gets hired what the cost was for that candidate. Now, what that allows us to do is actually to have a better view on where we need to spend our money. Where do we actually get the best output? I think a lot of the content which is here is, of course, now driven digitally, but this is something, if you want to do this today in your company, you easily can do as well, and you don't necessarily need to have all the digital tools available to you. all have a lot of data around us, and we probably gather them in some Excel sheets, and we probably never have the time to look at them, and we never have the time to actually analyze them and have better insights. Now, apart from that, we also have tools available to gather more data today. There's Monkey Survey, where we can put a survey up and just see which platform did you use to get in contact with us the first time you heard about us, for everyone that got hired last year. So you can gather some data yourself in these times where you have a little bit of time to have a better understanding of which tools actually are driving your brand image, are actually attracting the candidate, and are eventually converting that candidate and making joining. And even beyond that, you can actually also look at the performance, because there is a way of managing performance. You have performance management tools which are available in your company. Everyone would particularly get a score. So you can also even link it back to that point. So this is something which you could do, which will optimize your investments, and you can then from there on see whether the money where you're spending it for each level in the organization is actually spent in the right way. Yeah, and because of that, you will be increasing your time to hire, your quality of hiring, and also eventually your cost per hire. So that's one thing that I wanted to give away. So it's about analytics, and this is going to be the future. This is what's going to happen, and more tools are going to be available in the market. There are a lot of tools already available that can be linked up with your ATS, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it today in your own corner in your own company, because most of the data would be there. So that's a little bit from my end. I'm opening it a little bit for questions. I have a closing slide after that. We have still around 20 minutes to go. Akshay, over to you. If you maybe can guide us through the questions we get from the audience.
Sure. Thanks, Nico, and also to all of our keynote speakers today. So everyone, we now move to the final leg of our webinar, which is the Q&A session. If you haven't really posted any questions yet, please do that now. You'll find a Q&A tab right at the center bottom of your screen. So please feel free to put out questions. It will be great to also give an upvote or a thumbs up to each of the questions. That will ensure probability of the question coming up on top. So let's begin. I think I have a couple of questions already on the screen. The first one's quite interesting. It says, what kind of content on social media is best resonating with the talent pool right now? Pranshu, would you like to take that question up?
Yeah, I'll pick that up. So, look, interesting question. Employers are experiencing a paradox right now, because more people are on and engaging with social media than ever before, and yet the recruitment ads and the digital content are performing at suboptimal levels. So the answer to this paradox actually is quite simple. People are spending a lot more time online, doing what Nico mentioned in the beginning of the presentation doing. But they're also reading news and looking for inspiration to have a quality time during the quarantine. So it might not be the best time, especially if the culture of your organization is built on a very fun-loving and cheerful way, to put out posts, because that will not resonate with the target audience right now. You may want to think from the angle of what candidates really want to hear during these times. And that could perhaps be in terms of throwing out opportunities which are based out on stability, security, and hope. No matter what I described in my presentation as well a little bit is that authenticity is the key right now. The candidates are looking to feel safe and secure, and that's the feedback we normally get from the market, seeking stability in a time of uncertainty such as this. And recognize that many of the social content that you're going to be sharing will not only be uplifting your recruitment brand, but will also be overall helping the organization and company widely. So when you highlight what you're doing for your team and publicly recognize employees, you are showcasing to your clients and partners that work is still happening at the same quantum and level that it used to, and it puts them at ease as well. So this is also a great opportunity for a lot of TA leads, and they have actually started, interacting with the corp-com teams internally in terms of how to position the brand as well. So this is some of the key matrices that your content needs to resonate around to be clicking with the audience right.
Thanks, Pranshu. I think a very relevant question also at least in today's times of COVID-19. I see another one coming in. It's got a couple of upvotes. The question is there anything that we can do if the organization has stopped hiring completely and have no fair clarity as to when will we resume? Yeah. Mohit, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you, Akshay. Yes, I'll take this up. It's a very normal scenario in the current environment where most of the organizations have put the recruitment on freeze, at least in the short term. So what are most of the organization or the TA heads are doing at this point of time? As Pranshu mentioned in one of his quotes, when the fisherman is not going to the sea, they are repairing the net. So thank you, Pranshu, for giving me that particular quote. Yeah. So it's important that we start preparing a strategy at this point of time. Generally, in such kind of situations, whenever the market recovers, all the experts say that it's always a V-shape or a U-shape recovery which happens, which means there's going to be a good bounce back, which we are all hoping for should be there, which will mean that the number of positions which will come in one go would be on the higher side. So what you can do at this point of time is be proactive in those particular situations. Whatever you feel that are the positions which are going to come up in future, maybe you can start pipelining or talent pipelining for those particular positions right now. This is also a great opportunity for you to start engaging with excellent candidates which are available in the market at this point of time. Again, because once the market opens up, everyone's going to go after these candidates and they might not be available to meet with you. Yeah. Having said that, at this point of time, they're available. Reach out to them, have an exploratory conversation with them with no strings attached, keep them engaged. Yeah. That's one of the good things that you can do. Other thing which you can also do is most of the organization would have gone through the budgetary meetings. So you would have idea about which are the position that you would have hired in your entire year. Some of the positions, yes, might just not be hired at all. However, there'll be critical positions which would be hired. It's just that they'll get postponed. So if you have clarity on those positions which are going to get postponed but are definitely going to come, again, a good opportunity is to ensure that you start engaging with consultants and maybe just ask them to pipeline and keep the candidate pool ready. Whenever the position goes live, at least you'll save a lot of time at that point of time.
Thanks, Mohit. I think some very interesting insights from your answer. We have a number of questions actually now starting to flow in. Up next, I have this question with me. It says, do you see any major shift in hiring patterns on the quality as well as quantum of hires to be recruited in the near future? Nicolas, would you like to take that up, please?
I would love to pick that up. Thank you for that, actually. I think there's two parts to the question. The quality is going to be extremely important. As people will have limited number of roles to recruit, the overall view on getting better quality candidates on board is going to be the requirement of most hiring managers. You'll see that especially happening in sales roles, where people will need to see good long-term credentials and a track record. We saw that in 2009 also, once we came out a little bit through the crisis. So that's going to be something. And if the hiring manager is not convinced, the process is not going to move. And you might be chasing him or her, but it's going to be very difficult for you to move it forward. So there's definitely that in the next 9 months to 12 months, that's going to be some of the challenges you'll go through. If you look from a volume perspective, today we're less than 50% of the market in terms of roles which are currently available. So there's a drastic shift, and especially in certain industries, it's almost towards 10% or even less. Now, typically what we've seen in GFC and even in .com is that a lot of the roles in these companies will be put on hold, and there will be a moment when confidence sinks back into the market, and it will have some kind of a V-shape. We're now down on the V-shape. Once it picks up very hard. Yeah. So it will be like a rush to the market for most hiring managers, and it will put a lot of pressure on the talent acquisition team, because everything will come at the same time. So what's going to happen after that is that things will settle again. Yeah, and it will be a very up and down type yo-yo type of thing, but there will be that initial phase of extremely strong growth in terms of the requirements. And that's where you need to be prepared as a talent acquisition team and make sure that you already look ahead of the curve and prepare yourself in terms of what your strategy will be, in terms of what type of talent you want to pool already, and so forth. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nico, for that answer.
By the way, actually, I'm expecting the same from you.
We'll do that. Noted. All right. Over to our next question, everyone. Something very relevant and, of course, very interesting once again. It says, can digital interviews ever replace face-to-face interviews, even in today's crisis times? Yeah. I think, Mohit, this question hits your kitty well. Would you like to answer that?
Yes, Akshay, I'll take this up. The question says in current environment. In current environment, definitely. So you'll see digital interviewing replace the face-to-face interviews. The question would be, what if after the COVID situation is over, would we see digital interviewing replace face-to-face interviews? I think the best case scenario would be to use both the digital interviewing and the face-to-face together to get that kind of a comfort. Having said that, a lot of organizations would start seeing the advantages of the digital interviewing. As I said, initially it's going to be not by choice, where you're going to be forced to conduct a lot of digital interviews. But once, if the market recovers quickly and there are a lot of positions that as TA heads you have to hire, turnaround time would be one of the aspects which will be critical for you. Also, the organizations would have constraints on the recruitment budgets that you can spend, or there'll be overall pressure on the cost as well. So we shall see that you would prefer to conduct a digital interview with a candidate rather than flying that particular candidate down. So not by choice, but you'll start seeing a lot more of digital interviewing because of the faster turnaround time as well as the cost savings that it provides. And slowly and gradually, this will lead to the behavior change as well. In most of the TA guys, who'll start getting more and more comfortable, and the more comfortable that you'll get, the more adaptability is something that you'll see of the digital interviewing.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mohit, for that. Up next, I have a question that all of us in TA usually want answers for, and I think with the times today, this is very much relevant. The question goes like this. Are there any suggestions in improving the conversion ratio if my organization is hiring, but candidates do not necessarily have the confidence to engage in shifting workplaces right now? Yeah, quite an interesting one. Pranshu, I think this one's quite relevant for you to answer. I would like to take that up.
Yeah, it depends really on when you start addressing this concern. If the candidate was really involved with you right at the beginning of the process when this crisis started, and you did not really check on the triggers and the motivators for this particular candidate, that's the first mistake. But having said that, if you have a candidate which is already under offer and is nervous, you need to understand that he's bound to feel nervous. I mean, 90 to 93% of individuals are ready to work for a brand which has got a better reputation in the market than their own. So you need to compare that where the current organization lies and what you are offering to them. Having said that, the conversion ratio increase could be also attributed to the factor that the current situation is a little bit uncertain. So if you are chasing a timeline on a target, you need to slow down the hiring process in terms of just engaging with this candidate for a little bit longer and keeping him warm. Once the situation sorts out, the conversion ratio will start picking up. But as I mentioned in the presentation, the organizations which already see that conversion ratios are dipping because the candidates are getting a lot of cold feet while changing organizations are actually addressing this concern right at the beginning of the process and not when they come to the offer stage. Back to you, Akshay.
Great. Thanks so much, Pranshu, for that. Next up, I have a very direct question. It says, are the corporates hiring for senior management positions? Yeah, and I think no better than Nicolas to answer that question. Over to you.
I didn't get any calls recently, so definitely they're not calling me. So this is the trend we've seen not only in India, but actually across the globe. Or senior brand page executive, which caters to roles 80 lakh upwards, is actually withholding pretty well. Job flow is pretty stable there. And the view which we are having is that a lot of companies foresee to come out of this in some time or the other, and they will need this particular person because it's a critical hire, and they feel that they can use this time to at least pipeline, and by the time things finalize, some normalcy would get back into the market. So we actually see some good traction. It will depend again though on the industry where it happens. So not every industry, of course, is currently looking, but I've seen clients in manufacturing today, which has called me this week and said, look, we're looking for a business unit head for a 2,000 crore company. So these things are currently happening still, although these companies, their plans are not working and so on. So it is happening at this point.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicolas, for that. And with this, we also cross a 50 question mark, which is good news in terms of the questions coming to us. Next up, I have a question which is very specific to a core part of talent acquisition. The question says, will the candidate verification landscape see significant changes now that we will only rely mostly on digital interviews going forward and might not have a one-to-one interaction with the candidate? So candidate verification landscape. Mohit, would you like to take that up as your answer?
Yes, Akshay, I'll take it up. Logically speaking, it should. The organization would want to get more and more comfort. And if you're not meeting with a candidate in person, somewhere at the back of the mind, you'll always get a little bit of discomfort saying that, hey, I haven't met with the candidate. It's more to do with how talent acquisition as a function has been programmed for years. And sometimes the behavioral change does require a little bit of time. So the organizations or the TA folks are going to rely a lot more on external tools to get that kind of a comfort. As I also spoke during my presentation, organizations are going to rely a lot more on verification tools, whether it's the reference check side, they're going to have more number of reference checks, or whether it's the background check, background verifications, or even if it's psychometric assessments to get that kind of a comfort. You'll also see the more number of interactions which will be happening. As I said, instead of having 3 rounds of interview, you might have those 5 or 6 rounds of interviews. Till the time you get that comfort, the organizations are not going to proceed to the offer stage.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mohit, for those answers. Up next, a very, very relevant question once again. I think a lot of us in today's time are coping up with understanding how do we keep our high potentials engaged. So the question goes by this. It says, from candidate perspective, will high potentials be open for job change in this situation of COVID-19? Yeah, a very interesting one. Pranshu, would you like to take that up?
Yeah, Akshay, thank you. So, yes, indeed, I think it would be a good talent acquisition strategy from a medium to long-term perspective to engage with high potential. Something that Michael Page has been doing also actively is flagging off a lot of candidate profiles, who are looking out, who are high pots within their current organizations. See, fundamentally, why the candidate is looking out for a change is not changing because of the current situation. The nervousness and uncertainty is basically a deterrent to all this. So the high potentials are open for job changes and are actually engaging in conversations. Something that I picked up from our India business and also regionally, a lot of senior management roles that Nico also pointed out are being currently hired, and we are then hiring the CEOs and MDs of different organizations, which are doing extremely well. And while the conversation is on in terms of engagement right now, I think the conclusive part of this particular interaction will take maybe slightly longer than a normal situation, but definitely most of the individuals which were looking out for a change before COVID have not completely given up on the job search, because the fundamental reasons why they didn't want to be with the organization still remain intact.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pranshu, for that. Up next, a very day-to-day question for our TA folks here. The question is, what productive work should be on the checklist of a talent acquisition team when there is a hiring freeze for the next 3 months at least? Yeah. Mohit, would you like to take that question up?
Thank you, Akshay. Akshay, I think this question is very similar to the second question which I answered, wherein if there is not much for the TA guys to do, or there is a hiring freeze, what should be the strategy? So the answer is also going to be the same answer. You focus more on the long-term as well as the midterm strategy, start creating the pipeline. Nico also mentioned that there's going to be more of a V-shaped recovery that we're going to see, and there's going to be a lot of workload once the hiring picks up. So what you can do is you can get that particular work doing right now, so that once the wave hits you, at that point of time, most of the work is still done, and you have a great pipeline of candidates with you.
Actually, Mohit, I'm ending the session with some recommendations. So for people still on, I'll give you a little bit more insights in what I think should be done. So we will answer this question a little bit further in more detail.
Perfect. So Mohit, I'll just quickly continue as another question which has come up as a rider. The question is, are organizations today reviewing their variable pay plans for the next year?
What organizations are looking at is to decrease the fixed cost base for them. And there are different ways of reducing the fixed cost base. I mean, there are certain organizations which are going ahead with salary cuts across the board. There are certain organizations which are also looking at headcount cuts across the list. And then there are other organizations which are changing the structure from, say, a fixed heavy structure to a variable heavy structure. If you ask me, in the current environment, it's highly unlikely that next year the variable's going to be an exciting proportion of your overall salary. So somewhere, if you ask me, it's an indirect way of saying that, hey, we're reducing your salary, but maybe because of the legal or the statutory requirements, you wouldn't want to come across as an organization wherein the overall salary cut has happened. So you'll rather make changes in the structure of the salary and have a higher proportion of variable vis-a-vis a fixed component.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mohit, for that. We also have a question which talks about a very relevant set of folks which have been hugely impacted with the current COVID times, which is the campus hires. There's a direct question which says, how is campus management being taken care of in today's times by organizations? Nicolas, would you like to take that up and give some insights onto that?
Yeah, so I think the campus a lot is of course the people who would be most vulnerable in this particular environment. And there are a lot of companies actually looking at what to do exactly, because there's on one end the cost pressure which is there, the headcount pressure which is there, and then on the other end is of course the commitment you have with the candidate, and also the brand image you want to have for the future. So it's a fine balance. So most companies currently are delaying. The times of delays we see are majorly around July at this point in time. I've not heard too much of even beyond that, although I think we will hear some stories of even beyond that at this point in time. And on the other hand, I think there are companies who are in certain industries who are just taking it forward, where they don't foresee any long-term issues, or even in the short term any issues in terms of their business. So in varying degrees, you'll see varying solutions coming into the market. But for the people who will fall out, it is going to be a tough 9 to 12 months. And the problem they're going to have is, if they're not picking up something in the next 9 months, they're going to get in competition with the newer batches coming in, and they're going to get in a bad cycle. So I think I would recommend to most companies to look at it, because you will impact people's long-term career possibilities by if you would decide not to take the offers forward and onboard them at a certain point in time.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nico, for that. Next up, we have a question which targets a particular set within the virtual interviewing phase today. The question is, what about things such as body language, which is 60% of what a candidate communicates during an interaction? Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. Mohit, I think that's right up your alley. Would you like to take that up?
Yes, actually, I'll take it up. Thank you. Very relevant question. That's one of the things as an organization. So while we are working for our clients, also is looking at how do we identify some of the softer aspects. So one thing which is coming across is for functions which are more technical in nature, where body language or the overall software specs do not form a significant portion. So over there, you'll see the hiring definitely pick up. So wherein a lot more reliance would be on the digital interviewing side. For functions or for organization where the software specs are much more important, for those organizations, apart from just having, say, a telephonic discussion, you're going to rely a lot more on VCs. And even in VCs, you would want to have, say, multiple VCs to get that comfort. And while you're having those particular interviews, you might would want to be in a position wherein you could see the most body parts of a candidate while the candidate is sitting, so that you can observe some of the cues. Having said that, it's going to be very difficult to observe some of the non-verbal cues, and so that's the reason a lot more interviews have to be focused on the core traits which a role would require.
So, Mohit, let me add on to this, and then I can also close down, because we're almost at 6:10, which we decided to close down the Q&As. All Q&As later on, we'll can see how we can further work through it. We also, of course, have our consultants and managers in the team that are happy to look at all your questions in detail and support you on that. But just adding to what Mohit says, and this is from my personal experience, what I've seen is that the more I do the digital interviewing, the better I come at it. And it's a different skill set. It is completely different in the way you go about evaluating a candidate. The things which you typically, have through the finger, we say in German, Fingerspitzengefühl, you can't do now. So the gut piece is going away. So it needs to be a little bit more, I would say, scientific, and you need to find a different way of interviewing. And if you do it a lot, you will find your way. And it's just about an adaptation in terms of what you need to do. But if you just try to do the same thing and expect the same result, it's not going to help. Yeah? The medium really requires you to conduct the interviews differently. What I've seen also is that interviews are much shorter. Yeah? So where you would do face-to-face interviews for an hour, I think in a half an hour, you will be able to assess, and you can actually make it much more streamlined, so it becomes more efficient. So that's a little bit from my part. Let me close down with the last slide for today. And this is a bit my recommendations to you. So this is something which I actually used internally in the company, and it's about focusing on the outcome and then respond accordingly. And I think this is typically what you want in a situation like this, where panic sometimes can happen, and maybe some reactive or knee-jerk reactions would be there, and because of which probably the reactions are not delivering the desired outcome. So I've noted down what should be your outcome, and of course you can change for you personally, but this is a little bit what we picked up through the webinar itself is you want to be ready when things pick up. Yeah, that's the focus what you want to have, because work is at this point in time probably different or a little bit less, or however you are impacted. So what you want to have is you want to come out of this with a strong employer brand. So even when you do layoffs and so on, you need to think, how can I build this strong employer brand into the market? You want to ensure that you have the best delivery capabilities in place, whether that's through the technology you have, through the skill sets of your people and so on. But you need to have this in place, and you have time now to build this up. And then you need to have the right recruitment strategy in place, which comes back to the ROI where I spoke about. So 3 things which I would say to respond on, and what you can do personally to actually get ready and be prepared, is keep on building the relationships you have in the market and with your hiring managers. This typically would often be in a case where you have a particular role where you connect with hiring managers. Now you're not in the office, so you might be connecting less with them. This is a very good time to actually get a better understanding of themselves, what they prefer, what they look at for the future in terms of their business, so you can be better prepared in terms of how to build your pipeline. It's also working with your partners, understanding them better, what they actually can support you on, and testing them a little bit, see what type of mappings they can come up with, what type of information. So you can actually do a better assessment, because now you have the time to look a little bit more long term. And of course, what we discussed already is building proactively connections with candidates in the market, in your industry, and building that connection, which when things pick up, it will be an easier discussion for you to have. So that pipelining is important. So that's one part you can work on. Second part is on the building insights. See how you can gather insights beyond the usual metrics. So we know the time to hire and the cost of hire is very important, but what kind of metrics can you build to really assess that the tools you are using are used efficiently, and whether you can further optimize or invest in tools which might give you a better ROI. And lastly, it's about yourself, because it's about yourself and the team and ensuring the skill sets are in place. So do they understand exactly how to manage a candidate, how to control the candidate through the process and the expectations of the candidate through the process? Is there something you can help them in better understanding the different functions in the organization and how the organization recruits, and so on and so forth. And of course, working on the mindset and the well-being and so on of your team. So these are the three things I would say you can do. So build relationships, build insights, and work on yourself and build self. To close off, never let a good crisis go to waste. That's a quote from Winston Churchill, and this is something I take at heart. It only happens once in a decade, and it is always a good time for you to review what you are doing and what you were doing before, and see whether there is something you can do better. Know that we come out of this and it will go all fast again, and you will not have time to relook at certain things you now have the time for. So use this time wisely, because you're gonna regret it if you don't. I want to thank you all for being on the call today, and I hope you learned something. If you did, great. If you didn't, I hope we can support you later on. And if there are some questions you further want to be answered, please reach out to your consultant or person in the michaelpage business you are in contact with, and we will be happy to assist. My personal email address is also available on my LinkedIn profile. Please reach out if you have any particular questions further to this. I'm happy to respond to them.